Love it when my job gets made easy. Welcome in, everybody. Happy Thursday night to the Gem City Sports Podcast, brought to you by our friends at Rebich Investments. Rebich has had a really good night tonight because they get to be a part of our podcast, and they also get to be a part of an incredible Otters win as they also sponsor their playoffs. Happy to be, of course, partnered with Rebich Investments for our podcast, keeping financial guidance simple. If you want more information, head over to their website, www.rebichinvestments.com, or you can simply call 814-734-3433 during normal business hours, 814-734-3433 during normal business hours. Well, it's just me tonight, so I figured we'd do something a little bit different. I figured we'd do a live reaction to Game 1 of the OHL playoffs. Of course, in case you've been living under a rock in this area, the Otters taking on Saginaw in an all-USA matchup in the first round of the OHL playoffs. Did they make this easy on me tonight? So let's break it down. 8-5 the final. Otters beat the Spirit in game number 1, and they flipped the script from a year ago against Kitchener when the Rangers took game 1 of the series. Erie then had to go and level it up in game 2, heading back to Erie for game 3. So what an interesting game tonight. And, you know, it's so fascinating to me how in the NHL, the regular season and the playoffs are two completely different things. Regular season, you can be a high-scoring offensive team and in the postseason not be able to score at all, right? You run into hot goaltending, things get tighter in the playoffs, there aren't as many penalty calls, you don't score as many goals. And so what you are in the 82-game regular season is a lot different than what you are likely when you get to the playoffs in a game 4 or a game 5 and you can't score 3 or 4 goals, and, you know, that is what it is. But the OHL playoffs are not like that. Junior hockey playoffs most of the time aren't like that. You are in the postseason what you are in the regular season. And exactly what the Otters showed us at the end of the regular season is what they were tonight. You make the argument for 40 minutes they were outplayed. And that's the crazy thing about this game tonight. You look at the stat sheet, and again, I was able to watch a good portion of this game. Saginaw came out and completely dominated the first period. Erie didn't get much offense going at all. They had just 6 shots in the first period. They were outshot 14-6, and it just seemed like they were a little bit sluggish. Now, again, maybe part of that is you're traveling on the road, you haven't played in a few days, yada, 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 you know, however you want to go about it. But Noah Erliden kept them in the game. And, you know, he's going to give up 5 goals in the stat sheet, but you really have to start. You can't start this game, at least from my perspective, in the second period. You have to start in the first period because this was the point in the game right out of the gate where the Dow Event Center had a pretty good crowd and Erie just really wasn't in the game, at least from what it seemed like to me in the first few minutes. I don't think they played an awful first period, but they certainly didn't play nearly as well as they started to go in the second. And I'm going to get into how eerily similar it is to last year in a little bit, but one of the things that we have seen from this team in the last 2 weeks of the season is there's slow starts, and it's something that reared its ugly head again tonight. Now, the good news is Noah Erliden played his butt off in the first period, and I think that that's something that if the Otters are going to want to A, win this series, and then B, move forward into the second round, the conference final in the OHL championship series, like they're hoping to do, you're going to need that goaltending from Erliden to be able to be spot on. You know, Ryan Zapolsky and I have talked on this program and on our Hockey Talk Tuesday podcast, which we're hoping to bring back sooner than later in the last few months, that, look, you have to be able to come really heck or high water. You have to have a goaltending save percentage around 900. It doesn't have to be exactly that every single game, but it has to be in the vicinity of 900, because if you're not there, then you're not going to be able to win hockey games. If it's anything under 9, you're looking at a scenario like tonight where you have to score 6-7 goals to win the game. And I don't think Erie's going to be able to put up 8 goals per game, much less 8 goals per period in games 2 through potentially game 7. So I thought Noah Erliden was the story of the first period. I think he played tremendous. Saginaw, as you would expect at home, game 1, American crowd versus an American team, loud building. You know, there is a history between these two teams, including in the regular season this year. I thought he played really well. And then, to me, the second period was just a microcosm of what the Erie season has been really since the month of March turned. If you go back all the way to really the beginning of March 2nd, against the Peterborough Petes. In the wins that the Erie Otters have had in the month of March, and I'm just going down the list here, so bear with me, they have scored 7, 4, 7, 6, 6, and 6 goals. Nothing changed tonight. This has been, even without Carey Terrance, even without Matthew Schaefer, it has been a boom or bust offense. And you saw a lot of high-scoring games for Erie in the month of March, so maybe we should have expected this. But when I look at the second period tonight, the one thing that stands out to me more than anything is the depth of scoring that the Otters get. You start with Panofemis, team's leading scorer from the regular season. He gets his first of the playoffs, 4:45 into the second period. But then Dylan Edwards pops one 11 seconds later. Sam Alfano in a shorthanded goal. God, has he been a huge PKer for the Otters this season? There are 2 shorthanded goals, by the way, in the sequence for the Otters. So you've got 3 different goal scorers there. Then you get Callum Hughes, the going to be NCAA transfer, who makes it a 4-0 game, and you've got 4 different goal scorers from 4 different players. Malcolm Spence makes it 5 with the Otters' 5th goal of the period. He goes back-to-back with the goal to get their 6th, and then Martin Misiak. So you have, by my count, 6 different goal scorers that put up 7 goals in that 9.5-minute span, and then Panofemis cleans it up with another shorty at the end of the period. So, for as much as we want to talk about the vets, right, and I totally understand that Femis, Alfano are the guys that you're going to have to rely on down the stretch. Heck, Sam Alfano, Dylan Edwards, and Panofemis were really the only 3 offensive players you could trust on last year in the postseason at all. So it's not like this is anything new. But the depth of scoring for me, forget the 8 goals. The fact that you had multiple goal scorers is huge. Because I think what it shows in the remainder of these games in the series is that, there's a little bit of potentially belief that, if you're Chris Millette, you can roll 4 lines. And I think last year that was something that when Stan Butler was there, he didn't have the luxury of, is rolling 4 lines. We saw in the playoffs early against Kitchener, really when it got to game 3, they were a 2-line team, the Otters. And that's kind of being generous. They were more so 3 offensive players and Matthew Schaefer to kind of rotate through and play the offensive defensive position. But the 7-goal stretch for me is the twofold. It's the number one, you get multiple goal scorers, which is huge. The Erie needs that more than really they need anything else. And number 2, it's the avalanche at which they've scored goals. And so what you're now seeing with the Otters is they can play 40 bad minutes of hockey. And I'm not saying all 40 minutes outside of the second was bad hockey. You can play subpar hockey and still get yourself in games. And I think what we've now seen in the month of March with Erie is that when they are on, they're very difficult to stop because they're sneaky, they're quick, they find the easy area. I mean, how many of these goals did you see tonight that were just, they looked too easy? I mean, they looked like they had guys literally skating in the middle third of the ice. The first goal with Panofemis, that was an unassisted goal, just made it look way too easy. Same with the Dylan Edwards goal, just got open. And at that point, when you have open ice with these guys that may not be tall, but are quick, it's hard to stop. And Saginaw's defense had no answer for it with those 2 first goals. And then against special teams, it was a huge part of things as well. You get 2 shorthanded goals in the second period, but more importantly, you hold Saginaw to just 1 of 5 on the power play. And special teams is something last year that killed Erie in the playoffs. They had no success with it. And it really was, I think, probably their undoing in 2024. So, when I react to this second period, the first thing that I think to myself, besides the depth is, look, we're going to potentially see this 1 or 2 more times in the series where they're going to have the Otters, that is, a bad period, and then find a way to string together a boatload of goals, and we'll hold on that way. Is it a marketable strategy for the rest of the series? I don't think so. I don't think you're going to have a 7 or 8 goal period again. You might, but it's only going to win you 1 game. But it is at least a positive sign of the positive direction, I think, that could help the Otters probably moving forward. It is also ironic to me, when you go back to last year, and, everyone has been talking about this season, how this year is different. And, again, because of circumstances, they have a new head coach. Matthew Schaefer, of course, has not been part of the team with injury for the last couple of months. He's been skating. I believe the news outlets have reported in a non-contact jersey, or not a non-contact jersey. He's been skating, but I don't even think he's really taken part in significant practice time. I know Kerry Terrance has been wearing a non-contact jersey, so those guys are trying to nurse themselves back to full health. And by the way, you score 8 goals without Schaefer and Terrance, arguably your 2 biggest offensive assets. But, I think what you'll now see is for the Otters almost a microcosm of what last year was in game number 2. Remember, Erie scored 7 goals in game 2 of the series against Kitchener. They had 4 goals in the third period. They really turned it on late second, early third, and they had a barrage before they came home, and they ended up losing that overtime heartbreaker before winning game 4 and eventually losing the last 2 games in heartbreaking fashion again in the overtime round. So we have seen this before from Erie. We have seen this before where the Otters will have a goal barrage and then struggle offensively in the next game. Again, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but this team is very similar to last year. They added a couple pieces, of course, with the new NCAA and OHL and Junior Hockey League rule. You get a chance to draft some players as well. There are a couple of rookies that weren't on the team last year, but for the most part, this team is very similar to last season. And so I think what has to be in the Otters' minds, number one is, well, obviously you want to win game 2. But even if you can't win game 2, I think there has to be a piece in the back of all those players' minds that is saying, look, we have been down this road before. We have been able to put up 6, 7, 8 goal games in the postseason before. Doesn't necessarily do us any good the next time around. And so if I'm the Otters and I'm looking forward to Saturday, I'm not sure this 8-goal second period is going to be an indication of how you're able to put up goals or points on Saturday night. More often than not, this is the abnormal part of the series as opposed to the normal part of the series. And I don't think you're going to, again, get a situation where you're putting up 8 goals in a period. I also think this Otters team, and I'm not trying to criticize, but you're going to have to figure out a way to play a full game. This is a 7-game series. You don't have home ice. And as nice as it was tonight to be able to put up those 8 goals and essentially save yourself, because Saginaw, they made a run for it in the third period. They got down 8-0, scored 2 at the end of the second, potted 3 in the third, and they had momentum. Again, that was the other part of the equation is, you take out the second period, Saginaw outshot Erie 25-11. So the first and the third period were all dominated by the home team. They just really weren't in the game in the third period. So this series is far from over, clearly. There's no question about it. Saginaw's got enough offensive firepower to potentially go in and win game 2. I think if the Otters can win game 2, this series is not over, but there's a really good shot that it is. I don't know if Saginaw's going to end up winning at least 2 games in Erie. Again, given the fact that the Otters have been able to score at home, and you go back to the schedule and what the schedule has looked like. Remember, 4 of the last 5 games for the Otters were at home. 2 of those games, they put up 6 goals. You go back to the beginning of the month of March, and their first 3 home games in March, they put up the first 4 home games in March, they put up 3, 7, 4, and 7 goals. So they can score at home. Erie can score at home. There's no question about that. So, game 2 is going to be extremely pivotal. I think Saginaw is likely going to come back out. They're going to go very similar to what they did in game number 1 tonight, which is try to push the pace, be aggressive, and not allow Erie to really catch their breath. And you saw that by the shots on goal in the first period of the game tonight. And then you have to ask yourself the question, too, if you're Erie, and I think that this is probably going to be in Coach Millett's mind, are we not going to give up a goal in the first again if we play the way that we played to start tonight in game number 2? And again, you give credit to Noah Erliden, who ended up giving up 5 goals, but, a couple of those goals were in garbage time. So, you 32 saves. That's around where you want to be if you're Erie goaltending at this point in the conversation. So, Erliden keeps a minute in the first period. The offense completely blows the doors off the building in the second period. And then the third period, it was just about basically cruising to victory. I don't think 8-5, the title of this episode is Otters blow out Saginaw. I think 8-5 is not as indicative as, the game was. I think Erie had it pretty well under control after the second period and kind of more so cruised in the third. They got outplayed, but, when you've got a 6-goal lead heading into the second period break, your one concern is let's just make sure that we keep the lead. So a big win for the Otters. number one. To win on the road to start a series, much less winning on the road against an American team, is huge. And I think you could probably make the argument, and I'm not in that locker room, but you could probably make the argument that there were a few players and maybe a few coaches as well that were frustrated that Erie didn't get to start off the series on home ice. It was not, I think, by their standards, what you would want the regular season to look like in terms of how it ended. Erie had a huge home slate in the month of March and didn't necessarily capitalize in the way that I think that they probably could have to at least get closer to a potential home ice advantage situation. But to win game one is, of course, huge. Worst case scenario, you come back on Tuesday for game number 3 and you're home and you're tied 1-1. I think what this does for the Otters, unlike last year where you had to scratch and claw your way in game number 2, it allows a bad game to not hurt you. Because now even if you blow a tire in game 2, worst case, again, you go back home 1-1 and you're still feeling pretty good. Even if, let's say, Erie doesn't score in game 2, you're averaging 4 goals a game in the playoffs. And that's something that you can take into your home barn on Tuesday night in what you know is going to be a raucous crowd at the Erie Insurance Arena. So a lot of great performances tonight from Erie. I think Panofemis continues to impress me. The 2 shorthanded goals are intriguing as well. Erie did have a power play goal in this game, but if the Otters can win the special teams game, and we talked about this last year with Ryan Zapolsky and I when I was still working in TV and we did show after show live from the playoff games. Special teams is such an important part of Ontario League hockey. It just is. If you can pop 1 or 2 power play goals, or in Erie's case tonight, if you go +2 in the special teams department, whether that's power play or shorthanded goals, chances are you're going to win the hockey game. And Erie does that tonight, right? They go +2 in the shorthanded department. They score a power play goal to counteract the Saginaw power play goal that they scored later in the game. You do that all 7 games in the series, and you're probably going to win the series. You don't even have to necessarily score shorthanded goals. Just keep things even. And I think Erie special teams have gotten better this season. I still don't think it's probably up to what you would like to see as a coaching staff, but it's gotten better. And if you can bury a shorthanded goal every once in a while, that's just, again, additional fire in the belly for this Otters team that clearly has the offensive pieces. And who knows, maybe they get Kerry Durant's back soon. Maybe Matthew Schaefer is able to come back soon. I think it'll probably depend on how far they go in the playoffs. But remember, you've got Windsor, London, and Kitchener that are lurking up at the top. And not that you want to look ahead to the next series, but if you are forward-facing as the Otters are and you're now 3 wins away from the second round, you're going to need performances like this tonight, the second period specifically, on a consistent basis to get back to the conference championship or the OHL finals. So big win tonight for the Otters. That's my instant reaction. I think it's a win that you take, a win that you're happy about, but probably the greatest teaching lesson for Coach Millette in the fact that you score 8 goals and you still probably didn't feel as impressed with your game as maybe you could have because of the way you started in the first and the way that you responded in the third period, whether or not the third period was more so just to get into the locker room with a win or not. So a day to recover for the Otters. Big game coming up on Saturday in game number 2. Stay tuned. Gem City Sports Podcast Network, of course, is going to be following the Otters playoffs through and through. We're going to have some live updates and whatnot to come and, some plans in the works for our playoff coverage. So we'll, of course, keep you appraised on that as we continue to learn more and continue to get into this midst of the playoff run. So shorter episode tonight, but had to get on here and had to react to that crazy 8-goal second period. I've never seen anything like it. 7 goals in the span of 9.5 minutes. Shout out. I'm not sure if they're listening right now. They're probably on the bus to Saginaw. Maybe Sean's on his way to his family's house because I know his family is from up there. But man, Sean Bednard and Trevor Cabella, their voices must be hoarse after this game tonight because having to call that many goals in the span of that short time. I know it was difficult for me to call 3 or 4 goals in the span of 10 minutes, much less 7 in the span of 9.5. So congratulations to the Otters. Big win in game number 1. Worst case scenario, you get to see your team come back in game number 3 with an even series. So we'll see what happens on Saturday night, but a lot to look forward to for Erie and a 1-0 series lead. And now the question becomes, how do you follow it up in game number 2? Because remember, Erie was up and down in the Kitchener playoff series. We thought after game 2 like they had a hold on the series 1-1 going back to Erie. We saw what happened in game 3 and then game 5 and subsequently the OT loss in game number 6. So this series far from over, but it's an 8-goal performance in one period. So you can't sneeze too much at it if you're Coach Millette and the Erie Otters. All right, that's it for tonight's episode. Again, as always, our show is brought to you by Rebich Investments, keeping financial guidance simple. If you want more info, simply go to their website, www.rebichinvestments.com, or you can call their number, 814-734-3433. Again, 814-734-3433 during normal business hours. And, of course, those are tomorrow as well, with it being Friday. All right, we got a busy show as well coming up next Monday, 9 o'clock, X, YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, TalkErie.com. It'll be Flagship City Sports Talk, which, of course, is part of the Gem City Sports Podcast Network. And stay tuned as well. We're going to be posting and integrating more with our social media channels. Again, apologies. It's been a busy couple of months for the hosts here at Gem City Sports Podcast Network, but rest assured we are continuing to work on plans and have some really fun and exciting things planned for the next few months. So stay tuned. Otters playoffs in full swing. The Seawolves opening day is coming up next week. One of the best times of the year, man. And hopefully your Major League Baseball team won tonight too as well with opening day. All right, we'll see you all coming up on Monday. This has been the Gem City Sports Podcast Network. For Isaac Petgash and all of our hosts, Nick Artman, Paul Adamzak. We'll see you on Monday, everyone. Otters up 1-0 in the series. We'll see if they're up 2-0 when we hit the air on Monday morning.